Lead Time is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective, hosted by Tim Allman and Jack Caliberg. Lead Time taps into biblical wisdom for practical solutions to today's burning issues. Each podcast confronts real-time struggles facing the local church in a post-Christian culture. Step into the action with the ULC at uniteleadership.org. This is Lead Time.
Happy day. Welcome to Lead Time. Tim Allman here, and this is kind of an impromptu bonus episode of Lead Time. I was on with Vanessa Seifert. We were talking about leadership development and coaching and her work with the Nebraska district, and I was like, you know what? Let's just get her on here and let her share her story and what she's up to with the Lead Time community. So welcome, Vanessa. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Yeah. So Vanessa Seifert Consulting, or no, say the name, is that right?
You got it.
Vanessa Seifert Consulting, and you work super close with President Richard Snow, Nebraska District President, and you've been partnering with him for some time, and kind of the convergence where our hearts kind of collided as you were hanging out with us crazy Pacific Southwest District folks, looking at leadership development coupled with coaching. When you say leadership development and coaching in the same sentence, man, you got my ears. So tell us a little bit about first who you are and then what you do, what you offer to the church.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So like you said, my name is Vanessa Seifert, and I grew up in Houston, Texas, in an unchurched home, a de-churched home with a Czech former Catholic dad and mom from Mexico City with some Catholic roots. And so I grew up as an only child, first generation American, very interesting childhood. Happy nonetheless, ended up going to Concordia University in Austin on a basketball scholarship, wanted to pursue teaching, and all I really cared about was playing basketball and hanging out with friends, and ended up switching dorms my second semester of freshman year and jokingly got into the Good Girls group. And through that relational discipleship evangelism journey, the Holy Spirit captivated my heart, and I became a Christian in the dorms. And so I like to say that not only changed the trajectory of my life, but it also infused a DNA around the work that I do today.
Wow. So you went to Concordia, Texas, like, I just want to play ball, not a Jesus, whatever. It just seems like a good spot. And Jesus knocked you over with his love. That's pretty cool.
100%. I mean, when you grew up a city girl in Houston, who doesn't want to move 2 hours down the road to Austin
cool.
to play basketball? And so interestingly, I was very ambivalent that it is a Christian school. Huh. It didn't turn me off or deter me, but I really wasn't interested in what that meant. And so it really was this group of girls that befriended me and cared about me as a person that piqued my interest, not only about the school and what it means to be a Christian school, but who this Jesus is.
Oh, that is spectacular. You know, there's a lot of debate right now, loving conversation about who our schools are for, right? Are they covenant schools who are for, kids that like have it all buttoned up, their theology, catechesis all nailed down, which is a misnomer anyhow. We're always works in progress. Or are our schools missional? And are we going to arms open wide? We're not hiding who we are, what we're about, what our mission is. But at the end of the day, our mission is for Vanessas and those who don't know the love of Jesus. And so thank you for sharing that story. That probably impacted and continues to impact your work to this day in terms of wanting to see leaders come alive and grow and even become more comfortable in sharing their faith. So how did you get from Concordia, Texas to where you are today?
Yeah. So after I became a Christian, I knew that I wanted to be in leadership to some capacity and teach to some capacity as I had wanted to that point. But I really lost interest in the math and the science and the history and what that could look like in classroom teaching, albeit a very important work environment. It wasn't one that I felt I was drawn to at that point. And someone asked me, they said, hey, do you know what a director of Christian education is? And I said, well, I just found out who Jesus is. So no, I don't know what a director of Christian education is. Please do tell. And so after this description of a lifelong Christian spiritual formation educator based in a parish, that piqued my interest. And that summer went home to Houston and met a real life DCE and shadowed them and had a lot of conversation. And I was actually set to transfer to Concordia in Chicago because at the time Austin did not have a DCE program. And the Holy Spirit really interrupted that. He said, no, nope, you're not going to go to another city, you city girl. You're going to go to the cornfields of Seward, Nebraska. So
Boom.
I transferred to Concordia Seward, and it was the best decision that I could have made. Finished playing out basketball, had a great experience, and pursued a theology degree in DCE credentialing and met my husband. And so grateful for that formative experience.
I'm a Bulldog. I don't know if you know that. I graduated in 2004 from Concordia, Nebraska, Concordia Seward at the time. But so cool. So you're there and now you're working in partnership with the district. Tell the story of partnering with Richard Snow and everything the Nebraska district's accomplishing.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be in Nebraska again. So after I graduated from Concordia Seward, my husband, his name's Brandon, he told me when we were dating, I said, I'm a Nebraska girl, Vanessa. I really want to go to medical school in Nebraska. Hope that's okay with you. And kind of did my natural freak out thing of, what if there's not a call, as if I needed to be doubting God. And, he then and continues to provide. And so in my first call, I was a lifespan generalist in a mid-sized congregation called Pilgrim Lutheran in Bellevue while Brandon went to medical school and pursued graduate work simultaneously. I have still a love for the local parish, but even then knew that I could be drawn to either an academic circle or a district circle. But as a young adult, really didn't know how that could take shape. And so I did what any person in my case would do and enjoy the experiences and go to school some more. And so did that for 4 years, Master's of Science in Family Life. And it was really through that experience that Bowen family systems theory came alive for me in realizing the complexity of not just families, but really any emotional system, which can simply be defined as a group of people who spend time together. So I saw so much connection between Bowen family systems theory and life in the local congregation. And it was really through that journey of academic pursuit and the practical parish leadership that led me to want to go on and study organizational leadership and really lensing Bowen family systems theory more specifically to leadership in any setting, particularly the church. And so second call was to Shepherd of the Hills in San Antonio while Brandon was in residency, worked towards my Ph.D. in organizational leadership at a school called University of the Incarnate Word. And then we landed in Birmingham, Alabama for 1 year.
That's fun.
Yes, I know. We got around during Brandon's training. And then in that year, I was paused on parish ministry, started my dissertation, and then we landed back in Nebraska in August of 2012.
Okay. And that's in Lincoln there? Or?
Yep, in Lincoln. And so when we came back, I finished my dissertation, and I was really at this point of trying to understand what was next, what God had in store for me. I had a sense that there was a specialized ministry that he had been preparing me for, but I really didn't know what that looked like. And so instead of overly stressing about it or trying to figure it out on my own, I started adjuncting at a local college here, teaching leadership studies, and I found joy in it, thinking and knowing I wanted to pursue the academic track. But what I quickly realized is that those adult learners in that setting had so much on their plate. I mean, they had full-time jobs. Many of them had families. They were trying to complete a degree to get ahead in their own job. And so what I thought was going to be a transformative learning experience ended up being a lot of hoop jumping for many of the adults. And so I just didn't find as much joy in that. And then I had a dear friend, mentor say, hey, have you ever thought about jumping into the industry of leadership development in the marketplace? Because it's really a setting where your leadership theory that you have scholarship on can come alive, and you actually get to practice creating the growth environments that you researched. And so that's what I did. I started working at a local firm here in Lincoln called Leadership Resources. That's where I got my feet wet as an executive coach, coaching managers and executives in the marketplace and facilitating peer groups. And I really enjoyed that season of my life.
I feel unworthy to be in your presence, Vanessa. This is legit, man. Love your story and your passion. So people may be wondering, what in the world is Bowen Family Systems Theory? One of my favorite authors from back in the day, and gosh, 16, 17 years ago when I was studying, was Pete Steinke. Wrote a lot on healthy congregations using family systems theory, Bowen in particular, and then read books like Failure of Nerve. I forget the author of. Come on, who's
Edwin Friedman?
Friedman, give me a break. Friedman's like the Bowen. Yeah. Anyway, he's like the new gen. So if you can, layman terms, bring Bowen Family Systems Theory. You said you kind of defined it as just a group of people getting together and the way they interact in community. So yeah, how do you talk about family systems and Bowen Family Systems Theory in general?
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like I want to put a pin in this really quick and loop back around, because I don't think I answered your last question completely as I was taking a swig of water. How I met Rich Snow and got connected to the work in the district is that as I was working at Leadership Resources, he began his tenure as district president. And we have a mutual friend named Lonnie Jake Jacobson, who's actually was my former teammate, now his current teammate. Three of us are still remain dear friends today alongside our spouse as well. Jake introduced us and said, "Hey, Rich, you're new in this and you're my friend and you're telling me and showing me that this is a new role for you and that you're curious about this next season of life. I think you should meet my friend Vanessa because she has deep roots in the church. She gets district's middle judicatory well from her time in Texas, and she coaches managers and executives in the marketplace. I think she could be of help to you." And so Jake connected the three of us over lunch. What started as one lunch turned into 3 lunches, about 3 to 4 months in a row. And unbeknownst to me, at the end of that, Rich asked if I would serve as his executive coach. And this would have been in 2016. And so that's how Rich and I first met. And as we began our work together, he was getting some really great traction in his own development journey that I helped customize a track for him. He asked me to pitch a vision for something very similar that includes a peer component alongside the coaching and customization of content. And so I dreamed and I pitched it and he said yes. So 5 years later, here we are. Leadership Learning Communities is the process of which I speak. And we can definitely dig into that some more if you're curious, but really wanted to take a minute to finish answering your question.
No, that's great.
Yeah. So as far as this question about Bowen, so there's 8 concepts. I definitely won't unpack all of the concepts. Maybe I'll just talk about a couple that I think are really key as it relates to leaders and even the local church and thinking about the complexity that is the church. So Bowen actually was a clinical psychologist. And so family systems theory is a framework that's utilized in therapeutic settings. And so leadership studies has borrowed the theoretical framework to think about the way a leader shows up to a particular system. And again, simply put, a system, an emotional system, is any group of people who spend time together. That's what an emotional system is. And so within the church, we can think of the church locally as an emotional system. We can think of a board of elders as an emotional system. We can think of a multi-staff ministry team as an emotional system. There's so many layers. And so another key facet of systems thinking is this concept called self-differentiation, which in plain English means a leader's ability to stay connected to another person amidst some disruption or disorientation that's happening within the system. And so the more that a leader is open to understanding their tendencies on default, the better they're able to seek to remain connected. Like, for example, if I know when a difficult conversation happens, my tendency is to want to flee, to want to run, and to not engage. How do I, as a leader, then dance with my natural tendencies and seek to practice a different way, to remain connected, even when it's really hard? And so the work that I do with leaders in particular, in lensing family systems theory, those two concepts are the most helpful as I listen to leaders that I walk with. Their own understanding that they don't walk into a static church.
That's right.
That everybody brings their family of origin with them, and including the leader. And everything impacts everything. It's cause and effect. It's not linear. And so the more that they even understand that on the front end, that impacts their understanding of how they lead. And there is a bit of agency, I think, that also takes place when a leader understands that they can mature and show up in better ways. And really, this is the life journey of a disciple, is to grow in Christian maturity, to have this ability to die to themselves so that Christ may live more, because
Amen.
He's the perfect example of self-differentiation.
Well, he's the healthiest human being of all time, God in the flesh, right? Think about how Jesus showed up and stayed connected to his disciples in the midst of giving hard words, right? And how he trusts fully, he wrestles fully in his identity in the Father, and yet is still in this dynamic relationship with the will of the Father, which obviously led him to the cross for us. So obviously Jesus is a perfect God-man who maintained health in the midst of the swirling forces, the chaotic forces that were moving all around him. So to speak about quickly the role of anxiety and the necessity for peace for a leader. I'm sure you spend a lot of time on this. Being the Bruce Hartung from the seminary is one of my professors, and Bruce would talk about being a non-anxious presence. I think Pete Steinke and Bowen, they talk about non-anxious presence. I remember him coming up to me, Vanessa, about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and goes, when we talk non-anxious presence, you need to be a less anxious presence. There's no such thing as a non-anxious presence. Maybe Jesus, I guess. But yeah, so speak about anxiety and the necessity for the leader to maintain peace in the midst of chaos.
Yeah, so I think a few foundational words about the word anxiety are critical to really engage this leg of the conversation. And so I'll first start by saying when Bowen uses the word anxiety within family systems theory, he's not necessarily talking about the clinical definition of anxiety.
Right.
I like to say he kind of describes it as stirred upness, which isn't a very sophisticated way of talking about it. But really, anxiety or a stirred upness is just a natural result of being human. And the more I think we can humanize the reality that it's just that facet of anxiety is just going to travel with us everywhere we go. That's really, really critical. The other words I'd say about anxiety before answering the question more fully would be this distinction between acute and chronic anxiety. So acute anxiety meaning something really hard just happened to me and I'm feeling the residualness of it. A hurricane has just came through where I live and has wreaked havoc on so much. That would be an example of an acute anxiety experience. You've got recovery groups that come in and rebuilding. And while the efforts are felt, no doubt, for a period of time, things dissipate and they progress and they move on and health returns slowly. Chronic anxiety is something that happens that is incredibly difficult, that stays for a very long period of time. Our bodies are not designed to handle chronic anxiety and function well. And so we're culturally coming out of a season of chronic anxiety where we have been incredibly disrupted by the COVID pandemic. And so all that to say, I think while many of us have different experiences from our family of origin that impact how we live and lead, we all share this communal chronic anxiety that the Spirit continues to heal in all of us. And so those would be my opening words before answering your question specifically about the role of anxiety with family systems thinking. And so I appreciate Hartung's distinction between a less anxious presence and a non-anxious presence. So Bowen would use the literature non-anxious, but Hartung's right. That's not really feasible. And so the more a leader, again, can understand their natural tendencies and can grow in self-awareness and even coaching around their reactivity, the more they're able to respond, right? So this distinction between I'm just reacting in my normal autopilot that perhaps tells me I'm not enough. And so if I'm not enough, then I'm going to react scarcely. I'm going to be defensive. I'm going to turn inward, right? Whereas if I'm open to continue growing in self-awareness and self-differentiation and maturity in a hard situation to say, wow, in this moment, I'm kind of doubting myself. Where's that coming from? Is that true? Well, no, it's not true. And through this kind of internal dialogue, I'm then instead able to remain connected to this hard conversation and engage and not be offended and not worry, but instead I respond instead of react. And so this anxiety, this stirred upness is just a natural thing that happens in leaders. And the more that we can grow in our awareness and maturity of how to respond, the better we are able to show up in a context. And it also invites other people by watching us act maturely to be open to that same important work in their own life.
Oh, so good. The role of peace and the power and presence of Christ, the presence of the Holy Spirit. Jesus enters into the locked room, and the first thing he does, post-crucifixion, post-resurrection, is say, peace be with you, you know? And then he brings hard words. It's amazing if you look at the life of Jesus, how much his presence just immediately brings peace. It can bring division depending on who you are in the Jesus story. But yeah, the role of peace actually moves physiologically from my amygdala to my prefrontal cortex. And there in prefrontal cortex is where I can collaborate, innovate, divergent thinking, handle two conflicting stories at the very same time and find myself in the middle of it and move toward contribution of my respective ownership of whatever the struggle is rather than defensiveness. Apart from the peace of God, which surpasses understanding, we continue to live in that fight, flight, freeze kind of amygdala-driven response. Anything more to add as far as the role of the brain, Vanessa?
Yeah, the leaders that I walk with, I often share with them, if I'm completely honest, is a good reminder for myself that it really is a dance, right? If we want to theologize this to say, hey, do our brains work that way out of a need to not get run over by a car, right? And so this is what God has given to us in this fallen world, that we are fearful initially when we're put in difficult situations, right? That we shouldn't necessarily demonize that or be really afraid of it, but fully understand why we have that capacity now to then kind of dance with it, to say, hey, it's normal. It's normal, a normal human experience that when I feel threatened, that I do want to fight, or I do want to flee, or I do, or I don't have this sense of peace immediately. But let's just wait for it. Let's wait for it and lean into God and realize and know that it's coming, and then it's there. And so I think that'd really be the only thing that I would add to what you shared, is that it's this natural, human biological response that we just have to dance with this side of heaven.
So this is a lot of fun, Vanessa. Talk more about the fight and flight or freeze response. I think it's one of the easiest handles for us to say, I remember times when I was just either stuck or I really wanted to hit or I wanted to get away. And I think a lot of us have some natural, as leaders, we have some natural tendencies, right? And it's dancing with those natural tendencies. Say more about that.
Yeah. I really enjoy, strangely, seeing light bulbs go on for people when they realize that the self-differentiation journey, the self-maturity journey, the Christian maturity journey won't get us past the fight, flight, or freeze this side of heaven. And while that doesn't seem like an earth-shattering concept, perhaps in our humanness, we want to feel like we can get past that point of reacting that way, but we just can't this side of heaven. And so the more that we realize that we're invited to just dance with those initial tendencies that we have, and take some moments of pause and then respond maturely from there, then we really can can get some deeper understanding around that.
Yeah, it's so true, because we're so fallen, and the more mature we think we are, the more we're heading down a fast track toward dysfunctional, narcissistic possible tendencies there. One of the images that I like to have in a room, maybe it's conflict over a school family or kid not, and when kids suffer, man, people come in pretty hot. How the guess image for me is, how do I get up and out of my own skin and almost like hover between myself and this situation, these parents or whatever it may be, so that I can really, for a sense, and there's some empathy rhythms here, so I can really kind of, for a moment, jump into, I can't be God for them, but I can enter into their skin, if you will, and see things through their lens. And so then the way I respond, it allows kind of a less anxiety upon me to fix whatever it is, or to be God for them. And Bowen doesn't necessarily use that language, but as Christians, that's what we do. When we're trying to enter in and fix, give the answers all the time, we really have these godlike tendencies. And so how do I get empathetic with them and with myself, and even get kind of curious, like, that's kind of fascinating. I'm feeling that way, or my heart's racing really, really fast. How do I start to have just more kindness toward myself in the midst of the swirling, chaotic forces? Anything else to add there?
Yeah, two things come to mind. The first one is practice curiosity, and the second one is don't rescue other people from their stirred upness. And so the first one being practicing curiosity, when we do have these natural ways of reacting when something hard is happening, just taking a pause, getting curious what's going on in ourselves, but even inviting the other person to articulate, right? So person A comes to me and they're, in your example, very frustrated about something in a school situation with a child, and our reactivity might be to try to fix or to try to defend. But instead, what could it look like for a leader to get really curious? Pausing, sighing. Can you tell me a little bit more? Because anxiety travels. That's one of the tenets of Bowen family systems theory. And again, anxiety is this stirred upness. And so the less anxious I can be in a setting, that will also travel. Now, I'm not trying to pull off like an anger management monastic, silver bullet thing to say if I show up Zen-like, then everything's great. But rather, people match energy levels, right? And so if there's a scenario where someone's really amped, how can I, as a leader, create some pause and invite the person slowly to share more? And what happens is that naturally moves us biologically from that fight, that freeze, that fleeing, to more a higher propensity of more mature responses, right? And the other piece of what we can practice is to not rescue people. Yep. And I think, I know you've used Jesus as kind of the master example of self-differentiation. And here's another thing he was a master at, is not rescuing people from their difficulty. He rescued us from our sin through his life, his death, and resurrection, hands down. And yet, as he brings us to spiritual maturity this side of heaven, he then and now allows us to sit with very difficult things. And so the more that we can do that as a leader, the better. Because what happens, Tim, is when we step in and think we can save things, to borrow your language, being godlike, we actually rob people of their growth. And we know leaders are effective in a nonprofit setting when they help deliver on mission impact. The mission of the church is to make and mature disciples. Leaders are working against the mission of the church when they rob people of their growth.
We could double click on that one for a minute, man. That's huge. So what about a church body that kind of says, man, I think a number of our leaders, and maybe this gets to some of your work, how do you invite the pastor, the leader, to see himself as one part of the body? No more, no less. A significant part for sure, but one part of this wider, complicated body. And that allows him to, I think, one, ask for help more consistently, greater self-awareness around gifts and gaps, and the recognition that he's going to need a team of people around him. I mean, those three kind of principles, if you will, for me have just been game changer. And the pressure, there's still the pressure, leaders set the tone, come in, whether it's cast vision, shape culture, all those types of things. But I do it in community, rather than trying to be God for other people. And I think the more a leader enters in and kind of says, no, I do that. No, I do that. No, like the whole body kind of says, I don't think you're supposed to, one, do all that. And two, I guess, I may be sinning against God if I step into this system where the pastor almost is like God's rep. I as a called and ordained servant. I mean, it can get dark pretty quick and heavy, really, really quick for a lot of pastors. So how do you bring in this home? How do you teach these principles to pastors through your leadership development work and your coaching work?
Yeah, so Tim, what you just described is another Bowen family systems theory concept, which is called overfunctioning. Mm-hmm. So simply put, overfunctioning is doing for others what they can and should do for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so anytime you have an overfunctioner, you have an underfunctioner. The onus to change in an emotional setting to operate more healthily is not on the underfunctioner. So how many times do overfunctioning leaders bang their heads against the wall, wishing other people would step up and do more, without grabbing a mirror, taking a nice hard look and asking the question, well, how am I functioning? Am I living and leading in such a way that's actually robbing them of functioning appropriately? Yes. The onus to change in that setting is on the overfunctioner. And so for me, when I work with any leader in any context, and now we're talking about the church, it takes a long period of time. PR for the work that I do, if I'm being completely honest, probably is not very exciting. Hey, do you want to die to yourself for a 2-year process with high accountability and encouragement in a cohort and with a coach? I don't know how many people would sign up, but that's how it happens, Tim. Yeah, that's how it happens.
Agree. I mean, it's because we kind of, a lot of our work kind of overlaps, Vanessa, and it's not like, it's a tough stuff because there's ample humility. I'm going to be exposed, and I'm going to get exposed possibly in community. So how as a coach, as a leader, do you set, because you have to model this kind of less anxious, safe place for vulnerability of pastors saying, man, I have overfunctioned, man. And that's, I have sinned against the Lord, and for it not to be something that like discounts them for ministry, but just as the next stage on their leadership maturing process. How do you do that?
Yeah, so God has wired me with an incredibly high drive. And for over 20 years, I continue to learn how to steward it well. And I did it immaturely about 15 plus years ago. And so I joke with the people I'm in community with and setting the table for their own growth that I do it so that the Lord will sustain his growth in my life. So I'm not this, monastic rhythmic person who's just so calm and peaceful, helping these renegade overfunctioners live differently. We're cut from the same cloth, right? We're just located in different facets of the church and the body of Christ. And I think that even adds value, that I'm not them. I don't want to be them. And yet I have an understanding of the different layers of this beautiful kingdom of God that we share and inhabit together. And so I think with my experiences and my love and passion for creating community and setting the table for trust to be fostered, to really even invite reflection and conversations and curiosity, it's through that modeling, that work that I show, that over time, both in the peer group setting and then even in the coaching setting, that I had this image of like a zero entry pool, that you tiptoe in first, and then you just get a little deeper and a little deeper with appropriate transparency to whatever degree somebody feels comfortable with and exploring their own developmental journey as a leader. It's through that very continuous and ongoing and repetitive process that it just becomes normal. And I know you're going to have Rich Snow on, and maybe he might even give voice to how some of our leadership learning communities alum now are showing up into their circuit gatherings, not in the exact same way because they're not the same gatherings, but rather having experienced personal transformation in their own life, we know that that affects and ripples out into other spheres of life. And so through this process of just ongoing continual growth in community, that really has legs beyond the 2 years.
Sure does. So if anyone wants to get connected to Vanessa Seifert, and it's Seifert, consulting. Am I right?
Yeah, it's just vanessaseifert.com, VANESSASEIFERT.com.
And you are working, we got folks from across the Missouri Synod. You're working, do you work individually with pastors from across the Synod?
I do. While I'm a strategic partner with the Nebraska district with a large portion of my portfolio, I do have pastoral clients from across the Synod coaching remotely. So feel free to reach out with any questions about what that might look like.
I love it. I love it. You are a gift to the body of Christ, Vanessa, and thank you for your generosity of time today. This is Lead Time. Every single week we have fresh episodes talking about helping you as a leader in the Missouri Synod and beyond take your next steps to become more and more healthy, more and more mission-oriented, building teams, casting vision, reaching people with the never-changing gospel of Christ. We'll see you next week, and thank you so much, Vanessa. You're awesome.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Lead Time, a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. The ULC consults and brings together cohorts of congregations to build the culture, systems, and structures of intentional discipleship multiplication. To go deeper with us, create a free login on uniteleadership.org for access to exclusive materials and resources. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode.